Hi there, my name is Victor and I am a master technician.
First, you will need to lift the vehicle up and place it securely on jack stands. Never work on a vehicle supported just by a jack because it can collapse and kill you. The lifting points are located on the unibody pinch welds and they're marked by these two semicircular cutouts. So you have a set of them in the front and you have the same ones on the rear right here. So that's where you're gonna lift it up from. Since you're not going to have enough space at that marked spot to place both the jack and the jack stand, I'll use the jack on this part of the pinch weld. It's a little bit thinner, and that's why I have a steel plate here so that it doesn't crush it. And then I'm gonna place the jack stand in a designated location. So if you need to take the rear wheel off, lift it up there. If you're doing the front wheel, lift it up there. Or if you're doing both, lift up both sides, front and rear. Remove the front wheel, 21mm socket. First, you will need to loosen and remove the caliper bolts right here and here. The bolts themselves have a 14mm head, and then these sliding pins have a 17mm flange on them. A lot of the times when you attempt to loosen this bolt, the pin will just start spinning, so you have to usually hold it. So use a 17mm wrench to hold it in place, and then a 14mm to loosen the caliper bolts. Usually I'll just crack it loose, move on to the next one so that something is still holding the caliper in place. So we're gonna put the 17mm on here. All right, so now we can get these bolts out. 1 and 2. Take the caliper off and you can just rest it up here on the dust shield. It sits there nicely. And now you can take out these little springs here. Okay, so they come out just like that. If you want, you can pop these pads out here right now too, so you have less things in the way when you're taking the caliper brackets off. This guy's really got his money's worth out of these pads. There is literally almost no pad material left at all. Now we're going to loosen and remove these two bolts right here, and they hold the caliper bracket on. They're 19mm bolts. Pretty tight. Caliper bracket is off. So the easiest way to get the old rotor off is to use a little bolt like this. Thread size is M8 by 1.25mm. And then I'll usually put a little bit of lubricant or anti-seize on it just for it to go into the old threads easier. And then you can screw it into one of the two holes that are pre-drilled and threaded on the rotor. And then tighten it until it pops the rotor off. Now, if you don't have access to a bolt like this, you can just bash on the rotor from this side with a hammer and eventually it will come off. I don't prefer doing that because sometimes it will, put a pit on the rotor or dent it pretty deeply depending on how stuck it is. So let's see how this works. There you go. Nice and easy. All right, now we're going to service this caliper bracket, make sure the pins move smoothly and lubricate them, and then we're gonna clean where the pads go into the sliders and make sure that the pads slide smoothly. So what I'll usually do is use a wire brush on there and clean out any of the old crust and crud. And then you can use a small screwdriver, and if there are any remnants of caked on stuff in there, you can sort of scrape it off a little bit wherever the brush doesn't get into. Okay. Now we can pop these sliders out, so just get a screwdriver right here, and comes out like that. Same with this one. See, there's a bunch of rust in here too, so we're gonna brush that and clean it out. So the goal here is to make sure that the pad goes in smoothly and without any resistance. Sometimes when you're trying to assemble it, you'll see people are like hammering the pads in or pressing them in, and obviously that's a really bad thing to do, because then the pad's not going to be able to release after you release the brakes. It's going to keep rubbing on the rotor, and it's gonna wear out really fast. So now you can just compare both sides to see where this piece goes in. So this one will be here, and then this one will go here. All right, and then repeat the same procedure with these two sliders. All right, now that the sliders are cleaned up, we're going to pull out the sliding pins, and so hold the boot. What I do is just wipe them off nicely with a rag. Sometimes you will see a lot of rust build up right in this area. Then you want to really clean it out, so you can either sort of scrape it out with a screwdriver, or if you have like a wire wheel or a wire brush, you can clean it up like that. This pin looks great. There's no rust on it. So this is the product that Toyota wants you to use. It's a lithium soap based grease, and that's what we use on the sliders. Never ever use a petroleum based grease, because it will destroy these boots. It's gonna make them swell up a lot, and it can this rubber piece right here will also swell up, and it can get the pins jammed inside the sliders, so your brakes won't move. So no petroleum based grease. Some people will use a silicone lubricant, and seems to work okay, but that's not what the manufacturer specifies, so I'm gonna use what they tell us to use. Okay, so another little drop of this, smeared all over the pin. Put the pin in. Sometimes there'll be, the pin will keep popping out because there is an airlock inside. So you can take a little screwdriver and just get the lip lifted up and get any air pressure released from there. And lastly, we're gonna take like a brake protection paste, and I'm just gonna put some on the sliders here so that the pad can slide easily and doesn't get stuck in there. Like that. Okay, and now we can move on to the brake pads themselves. So here are the old ones, and then here we have the new ones. So I just orient them like this with the inside pad and outside pad. Now I'll clean these shims. So if the shims are rusted or in bad condition, you know, damaged in some way, you should replace them. If they're still happy and not corroded in any way, you can reuse them. So this one looks quite good. Wipe the old grease off of them, clean them up a bit, and then you can reuse these ones. So if you keep your workplace organized, you know which pad's gonna go on the inside, which one's gonna go on the outside, and it's gonna all go back together properly. So now this is what I use on the back of them. It's a brake caliper grease from Toyota as well. Just helps prevent them from making noise. So put a couple little dabs on here, and then you can reinstall the shim. Now don't be putting it on the back here. You'll see a lot of people smear the back of the shim with grease or anti-seize. That's pointless. All it does is just create a giant mess. There is no reason to do that at all. So a few dabs on there, and then reinstall the shim. And then you have these brake pad wear indicators. So just pop them off from this side with a screwdriver like that. Comes off. Has a little tab on it right there. So that engages into this little hole right here. I see sometimes people put these upside down. So make sure you do it properly. It goes in this way. And it makes sort of a click noise when it's on, and you can see that it's fully engaged. And once the pad wears down to this level here, it's gonna start rubbing on the rotor and making a squealing noise. So let's get this this indicator off too, and then install it on here like that. Sometimes if this little tab doesn't pop in, you just have to push it in with a screwdriver. So now the pads are done and ready, and you can tell which one's going to be the inside because it has the impressions from the pistons on it, and this will be the outside pad. The only reason it matters is the position of the indicators, because if you go like this, they're going to be on the opposite end. So this will be now ready to be reassembled back to the vehicle. And in case you want to order these yourself, here's the part number for the front brake pads. We're going to use a wire brush on the hub and clean it up real well to make sure that there are no little rust chunks that are going to fall between the hub and the rotor and cause a brake vibration. So take your time and brush it really well. Next, you will need to compress the brake caliper pistons. This one's a dual piston caliper in the front here. There are a couple of ways of doing this. You can use an old pad in here, and you use it so that you can press them both at the same time. And then if you have like big channel locks like this, you can grab it like this and start squeezing, and the pad presses on both calipers at once. So it's moving back a little bit slower than you'd want it to, but just keep pressing and pressing and pressing, and you will compress them eventually. The other way to do it is to use a brake caliper spreader tool like this. So you fit it in between here. First we'll back it up so that it's a little bit smaller. Goes in here, switch direction. And done. All right, make sure that the boot here is not popping out, because you don't want this rubber boot to get stuck between the piston and the back of the pad. So if it does pop out a little bit, you can get a small flat blade screwdriver and go around and pop it back in place. Now you can go ahead and put the new rotor on. So I just machined mine on the lathe. I didn't buy new ones because they still had a lot of meat on them. So what I always want to do is try to line up the spots where the little holes were on the rotor to the same position. That way, if there's any like rusted ridge there, because sometimes rust builds up in there, so I'm gonna push the rotor away from the hub. So line it up, slide it on, and then you can grab a lug nut and just spin it on so that holds the rotor in place. That's gonna make it easier for us to put the caliper bracket on and everything. Next, we will install the caliper bracket. So you can take a little bit of anti-seize if you want, just to prevent the bolt from getting stuck in there, and it makes it go in easier. And then slide the caliper bracket over. Get the bolts back in there. And tighten to 114 foot-pounds. Now, if you put some anti-seize on them or some lubricant, don't tighten them that much, because when you put a lubricant on, you need less torque to achieve the same amount of clamping force. Install the brake pads, so you can tell which one's which by the markings on them. This one has the mark from the caliper, and then this one has the mark from the pistons, so that will be the inside pad. Okay, there we go. The new pads come with these new little spreader clips, and there are holes in the back of the pad that they fit into. Now you're gonna have to hold the pads together with one hand and get the clips in, because otherwise they're gonna wanna pop out. And now you can take the caliper and slide it over. And once it's over, it's gonna hold the pads from falling out. And now we can get our little 14 mil head caliper pin bolts back in. And tighten them to 25 foot-pounds or moderately tight. If the pin wants to turn, hold it with a 17 mil wrench, like we did when we're loosening it. And then I take a little screwdriver and just pull up on these boots from the corner just to get any air out of there, like that. Get the air out so that it's not pressing on them, and there we go. Now we can take this lug nut off. and put the wheel back on. Have the gun set on low torque so it doesn't over torque the lug nuts. After you complete the brake job, check the brake fluid level. So in our case, it's right at full mark, at max. If the brake fluid has been topped up in between, when you compress the pads, it will push some of the fluid out and it can potentially overflow. So in that case, you can use a little syringe and suck some of it out of the tank until it's at max mark. And just wash off any brake fluid that spills over, because it's not good for your paint. You clean it off with regular water. It's water soluble in essence. And then we can lower the vehicle down. After you take the car off the jack stands, go ahead and torque the wheels to 76 foot-pounds. And that is it. Brake job is completed. Thanks for watching. Please check for product links below the video for any tools or supplies needed to complete the procedure shown in this tutorial. If you would like me to make a specific video, please leave a suggestion in comments. And don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Cheers!